Well, autism rates keep rising, and many of us would like to know why. Recently, the Trump administration has been linking it to Tylenol. Naysayers insist it's purely genetic. But what about vaccines? Seems like they're still missing from the conversation. Well, our guest today, Matthew Cormier, is an independent medical researcher who recently published a peer-reviewed article in the Journal of Independent Medicine titled Vaccine-induced viral reactivation in autism spectrum disorder, a review, hypothesis, and implications. So in simple terms, his paper pulls together a lot of existing research and suggests a very specific mechanism. Some children carry dormant viruses like herpes family viruses from birth or early life. Certain vaccines may briefly wake those viruses up, causing brain inflammation. And in a small subset of kids, that inflammation may lead to regressive autism. He believes the medical community has overlooked this possibility, and he thinks his paper could open an entirely new line of research. Matthew, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Kim. Thank you for having me on.
Okay, so explain how did you come about this research exactly? From my understanding, your research pulled together, so you were not conducting like your own clinical trial or anything, but you were looking at research that's been done and kind of bringing it all together and analyzing it. Is that right?
That's correct. The goal of my research was to identify the variable or the variables on what creates susceptibility, hypothetically speaking, from vaccines triggering autism. So not all children develop regressive autism following a vaccine or a series of vaccines, but there's too many anecdotal reports of children that are developing this to ignore. So
Right.
my goal was to identify how is this happening and provide a hypothesis where it can be tested on a mechanism.
Okay. So, so you're saying that vaccination in some kids can trigger inflammation of the brain, and then that's what ultimately, because there is a lot of questions there on what exactly is it about vaccines that could potentially be causing autism, right? Is it the vaccine type itself? The type we've got like mRNA vaccines, we have like the traditional vaccines. But people have been claiming way before mRNA came out, right? That, hey, I vaccinated my kid and the next thing I knew, they weren't the same. And there's been a lot of people who've reported this, but this has of course been shooed away as, oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist and it's not the vaccine at all. There's nothing in the vaccines that would do this. And plenty of people get vaccines and nothing happens to them at all. Plenty of kids get them and nothing happens to them, right? So it's like, why certain kids? And that's what you're trying to figure out.
Right, exactly. So in order to establish, hypothetically speaking, if vaccines can trigger autism, well, how? What are the biological variables involved? So in order to identify or hypothesize on this causal relationship, the first aspect of this was looking into what autism is, what causes autism. If we remove vaccines from the equation, what does the medical literature say? What is autism? When I started investigating this and researching this, I came across a large body of research implicating common viral infections playing a central role in causing autism. Whether it be viral infections contracted during pregnancy and passed on in utero and playing a part in causing autism later on in the offspring, or viral infections producing viral encephalitis, and that acting as a trigger for ASD in children, teenagers, or middle-aged adults. So one of the big ones that I kept coming across in my research was herpes simplex. That virus is implicated in multiple different studies as playing a major role in causing autism by getting into the brain.
Huh.
Yes. So
Okay.
the second aspect.
So just to back up for a second, when you say encephalitis, that's what exactly?
Encephalitis simply means inflammation in the brain and the central nervous system.
Okay. So you're
Viral
saying that
encephalitis.
a viral infection can cause the brain to inflame, or okay. So right now, we haven't gotten to the vaccines just yet on this line of reasoning. So you're saying right now, having a virus could trigger inflammation. I mean, I think everybody in the world has contracted a virus at some point. herpes simplex 1, which is like cold sores. I think like practically everybody has that. What percentage of people have that virus?
Right now, the current statistics say about 60%. 60% of the global population are carriers for herpes simplex type 1.
Is that passed mother to baby, like when the baby's in the womb?
It can be, yes. And that's what the research suggests. Not with herpes simplex type 1, as far as the congenital infections, but herpes simplex type 2. Something really significant that I came across in my research when we talk about prevalence rates and the rates of viral infections. Um, so herpes simplex type 2 is a documented risk factor for having an autistic child if an outbreak occurs during pregnancy. The prevalence of herpes simplex type 2 around the world is about 13%. So 13% of people are carrying herpes simplex type 2. There was a really, really important study that came out examining autoimmune antibodies in the brain in children with autism versus a healthy control group. And what the
Mhm.
researchers found was that in the autistic group of children in this study, 65% of them were carrying antibodies for herpes simplex type 2. Not only that, they were carrying IgM antibodies, which indicates active or acute infection. So the global prevalence of herpes simplex type 2 is 13%. In this particular study, 65% of the autistic children were carrying herpes simplex type 2. So that's
Okay, and that's
significant.
just so that the audience understands. Herpes simplex 2 is the sexually transmitted version. This is like genital herpes, whereas herpes simplex 1 is like the cold sore herpes, right?
Generally speaking, yes. Either can occur pretty much anywhere. Someone can
Huh.
get herpes simplex type 2 on their face, and vice versa. Herpes simplex type 1 can appear genitally.
Okay.
But
But in this particular study, they found that 60% of the autistic children were carrying, you say, antibodies for herpes simplex type 2. So they clearly they had contracted this from their mother, right? So she was carrying herpes simplex type 2. The kid then got it, and so there was a super high rate, a high prevalence rate of autism in that group. Okay.
correct. And not only that, but again, when the global prevalence of a viral infection is 13%, and then you look at research showing that autistic children, they're testing 65% positive for this virus. That's huge.
Right,
That's
right.
significantly higher than the global prevalence. So it's considered a strong association.
Sure.
What this
Now,
study
looking at herpes simplex 1, 60% of the population you say has herpes simplex 1, then was it like 100% of the autistic kids had herpes simplex 1?
in this particular study, it wasn't evaluating that. It just cited HSV2. But in that particular study, the children that were carriers for HSV2 and had IgM antibodies, 96% of them had autoencephalon antibodies, meaning autoimmune antibodies targeting the brain. So nearly all of the children that were carrying herpes simplex type 2 also had autoimmune antibodies in the brain, which may, what the research implies, that may play a significant role in the ongoing chronic inflammation, neurological inflammation involved in autism.
Okay. So herpes simplex 2, when they're contracting it, is causing inflammation in the brain, and that is potentially what's causing the autism.
Correct. Right. So again, the focus of my study, where it's a review of existing medical literature suggesting and implicating common viral infections causing autism, viruses like herpes simplex.
What other
And
viruses could cause it, according to the research?
CMV, the documented environmental risk factors as far as viral infections are concerned for autism is rubella virus, CMV, which is a herpes family virus as well, herpes simplex 1, and herpes simplex type 2. So we have that. We have a large body of research showing that viral infections may be directly involved in causing autism. The second
Okay.
aspect of my paper was to examine, how do vaccines come into play here? If viral infections are causing autism, hypothetically, how are vaccines involved?
Yeah.
And that's where I came upon a phenomenon known as vaccine-induced viral reactivation. It's where a person receives a vaccine and it reactivates any dormant infections, any dormant viral infections that they may be already carrying. So
Mm.
they may have been a carrier for herpes simplex and it was lying dormant inside their body, not really causing any problems, no disease from it. But they receive a vaccine, especially a child when their immune system isn't fully developed. They receive a vaccine or a series of vaccines, and it causes that virus to pretty much explode inside their body. It causes the virus to reactivate, begin actively replicating, and trigger various inflammatory processes. But in the context of the discussion on autism, if a vaccine reactivates a virus and then it makes its way into the brain and triggers viral encephalitis, now we have a link. Okay. So viral infections, there's research showing they're directly involved in causing autism. Viral encephalitis is a trigger for autism. And we know that vaccines can reactivate these viruses
Hmm.
and inadvertently trigger viral encephalitis. So,
Okay. So the vaccine could be causing an emergence of a condition that you were carrying, a virus you were carrying, but you didn't know you were carrying it. So maybe, like, for example, during COVID, we saw a lot of strange reactions to the vaccine. Like, one I can think of was Gavin Newsom, who we don't know, but we speculate that the guy got the vaccine and then shortly after, half of his face looked like it was melting. And we saw this with a lot of people where half of their face just started to droop, and whether it be the Guillain-Barré syndrome or Bell's palsy or some, there was like these triggers that were causing people to have a droopy, their face to droop or some kind of strange reaction there. So you're saying that that possibly was, they were carriers of that condition or that virus. The vaccine triggered their body to go, oh, here it is. Now it's going to present itself. You didn't know you had it, but now you know.
exactly. That's exactly the premise. That's the risk of vaccine-induced viral reactivation. It's not limited to just autism. Bell's palsy was very common. Justin Bieber as well, I believe he developed Bell's palsy following vaccination. If you look at the medical literature, the most common causes of Bell's palsy are, again, viral infections, herpes zoster, the virus responsible for chickenpox, herpes simplex. It gets inside the nerves, and that's what causes the facial paralysis.
Hmm.
Um, this could be, hypothetically speaking, explain the variables in disease presentations following vaccines.
Yeah.
Um, in the same sense that people get different, let's say, herpes blisters in different areas of their body, you can get herpes reactivation in different organ systems. So one person may get herpes simplex on their lip. For another person, it may appear on their finger. But when that's happening internally, if herpes simplex reactivates in the nerves responsible for your facial movement, we may see Bell's palsy. For another person, it may trigger Guillain-Barré by getting inside their motor neurons and causing inflammatory response.
Yeah.
For another person, these viruses may reactivate inside their liver and trigger metabolic disease. So it's very complex, but this research is the most concerning I've come across in regards to vaccine injuries and the most
Okay.
damning.
Lately, the Trump administration has been pointing at Tylenol, right? That has been what they've recently said is Tylenol, Tylenol, Tylenol. When a woman is taking Tylenol when she's pregnant, or if you give Tylenol to a baby when they're really like under the age of 5, I think is what they were saying. And that's interesting because why do you take Tylenol? When do you take Tylenol? You take Tylenol when you're feeling sick. So if a mother is taking Tylenol, it's because maybe she's running a little fever. So there's some sort of a virus that she's got going on. And same thing when you give a baby Tylenol, you don't do it just to give them Tylenol. You give them Tylenol. Lately people have been taking Tylenol and giving their babies Tylenol to prove some sort of stupid point. But normally you give your baby Tylenol when there's a fever. And so clearly they've got some sort of a virus or an infection, right? So do you think that could actually be, maybe it's not the Tylenol itself, but it's actually the reason you take the Tylenol that is causing the autism?
Right, absolutely. So Tylenol would be considered correlational. The research suggesting that Tylenol is involved in causing autism would be correlational. And a great explanation for that would be, well, why are these children taking Tylenol to begin with? Or why are
Yeah.
pregnant women Tylenol to begin with, there's obviously an inflammatory pathology happening. There's acute illness. Now, the
Yeah.
question is, what's causing the acute illness? And then we can
Okay.
kind of go and cross-reference this through medical literature and say, okay, well, is acute illness implicated in causing autism? And yes, absolutely. And so that's kind of where we get into a discussion on correlation versus causation.
Sure. So if the cause is inflammation in the brain, essentially, based on a variety of different viruses that could cause inflammation of the brain, that's what I'm understanding. What you're saying is that the mom gets a virus, or the little infant gets a virus, or the virus, starts rearing its ugly head, reactivating because they did something like a vaccine or something that caused it to suddenly, come out of dormancy. Then it's the inflammation of the brain that is essentially what's causing autism. Um, so why is it that when an adult gets a virus or a vaccine and it triggers, Bell's palsy or something, why are we not seeing adults becoming autistic?
We are actually seeing adults becoming autistic. Right now, generally speaking, as far as the clinical diagnostic criteria for autism, it's considered a neurodevelopmental condition. And so if it doesn't happen within a certain period, I believe it's before the age of 3, you wouldn't necessarily get that diagnosis. But if a person can check off every other aspect of that diagnostic criteria later on in life. For instance, I cite in my study, there's case reports of people, 11-year-olds, 14-year-olds, a 31-year-old man, that they were healthy, they were neurotypical, they had a bout with herpes simplex encephalitis. So the herpes simplex virus got into their brain, it triggered an inflammatory pathology, and they began exhibiting symptoms of autism, and they went on to meet clinical diagnostic criteria for thereafter. So they were healthy, normal, have herpes simplex encephalitis, and for the rest of their lives, they're now autistic.
Hmm.
That research is significant.
Okay. I feel like the rate is lower, though. Do you think that rate is lower than maybe when it happens to kids?
Children, young children, their immune systems aren't fully developed. So they're going to react differently to a vaccine than an adult will. That's a definite, that's a guarantee. That may play a large part in this. In the same regard, the central nervous system, the brains aren't fully developed at a young age as well. So
Okay.
those may be variables involved in this discussion.
So the problem with this whole thing, Matthew, which I'm sure you've thought about, is, what you're saying is, well, what looks like it might be, the research looks like viruses could be causing the autism. That essentially viruses that cause inflammation of the brain is what could cause autism. And then at the same time saying, and vaccines that you take to prevent viruses are the very thing that might be causing, a virus to rear its ugly head, and then you end up with autism. But people sit there and say, okay, but I want a vaccine to prevent me from getting herpes simplex 2 or herpes simplex 1 so that this doesn't happen to my kid or to me, right? I mean, see it's like the logic there. Somebody will then say, well, if it's a virus that's causing autism, then I want to make sure I'm not going to get that virus. What's the best way to make sure I'm not going to get that virus? Well, I need a vaccine, right?
Yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22, but I think really the most important aspect of this discussion is what creates susceptibility to viral infections. Um, I'll give you a great example. During the COVID pandemic, before vaccines were released, there were people that came down with COVID and they were exposing family members, their partners, their wives, husbands to the virus. But there's many such instances where transmission didn't occur. So your boyfriend or husband could have COVID. You're sharing a bed with him. You're in close quarters. You're being directly exposed to the virus, but you never catch it. You never
Yeah.
test positive. You never get sick. So there's also research suggesting this happening with viruses like HIV. There's long-term studies showing that one partner in a relationship could be HIV positive, having unprotected sex with their partner over the course of years, but the other partner that's HIV negative never becomes HIV positive.
Yeah.
So there's variables when we talk about viral transmission and susceptibility to viral related disease. That should be at the forefront of medical research right now.
Yeah, like
We know
why certain
that
people get sick and others don't get sick, like why certain people contract and others don't. Yeah.
exactly, bingo. We know vaccines have adverse events. We know vaccines can trigger different disease processes. There's too much research to be ignored. But the research that is being ignored is the environmental risk factors that are breaking down our immune systems and making us susceptible to viral infections.
Mhm.
One of those would be exposure to heavy metal toxins. Um, there's a lot of research in both animal models and humans as well, showing that exposure to toxins like mercury, lead, cadmium will increase your risk of acquiring a virus, and not only that, developing a disease process following transmission. I'll give you a quick example. There was a study that was published in 2021 on bird flu, and it was shown that in California, ducks that were being environmentally exposed to the toxin mercury were 5 times more higher to test positive for avian influenza compared to ducks that were not mercury toxic.
Hmm.
So um, there's a lot of other research showing the same correlation, the same connection between heavy metal toxins. They break down our immune systems, and now we become susceptible to viruses. So what's even worse is that when you look at the research showing that toxins like mercury are involved in creating virus susceptibility and weakening our immune responses to viruses, and then you realize that mercury was being used as a preservative in vaccines for nearly a century.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
it's, you know,
So it all kind of comes together. I mean, what you're basically saying is this all kind of comes together. Like the vaccines have the very metals that would cause you to be more susceptible to getting a virus, which is interesting because what we also know from the research from the Cleveland Clinic that came out, which was the more vaccinated people were for COVID, the more likely they were to get COVID. And it was a direct correlation with like, you got one jab, you were this percentage more likely to get COVID. You got two, you were even more. You got three, you were even more likely. You got four, you're even more likely. And it was a direct correlation. And the Cleveland Clinic was like, whoa, we didn't really expect that outcome, but that's what we saw. So this should be maybe, people should question whether or not they should, if this is the strategy that we should be using to prevent COVID. But that makes sense if it's like, well, they're using preservatives that then make you more susceptible to contracting illness. That makes sense, right? Same thing with the
right.
Tylenol correlation. That makes sense. When would you take Tylenol? When you're not feeling well. Well, why wouldn't you feel well? Well, because there's maybe some sort of virus or inflammation that has happened in your body that's causing you to feel sick. And so you take the Tylenol, right? You get a fever because your body's trying to fight off that inflammation. But it sounds like more than anything, inflammation is the problem. And I think a lot of research that a lot of health research, I'd say over the years, the more recent years, has really focused on inflammation and preventing inflammation. People eating, anti-inflammatory diets, wanting to do anything for anti-inflammatory, to try to keep that inflammation down because inflammation seems to be linked to a whole host of problems, not just this one, not just autism.
I understand what you mean. The thing about when it comes to inflammation is a healing response. So if you have an infection and you don't mount a proper inflammatory response, the infection becomes chronic. It lingers,
Right.
right?
Okay.
So when people are dealing with chronic illness, let's say they have chronic infections in various organs in their body and they're exhibiting symptoms, et cetera, they do an anti-inflammatory diet and it's symptom management, but it's not healing.
Yeah.
Healing occurs when the body clears that virus, when you get a fever, an inflammatory response, and you restore homeostasis. What's happening around the world, and this is a bit off topic, but it's in the ball game, is that we're all becoming immunosuppressed and immunocompromised. And one of the most significant events, in my opinion, in the history of mankind is the fact that all of our body temperatures have dropped around the world. So for over a century, healthy resting body temperature, the average body temperature was 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And in
Mm.
the last 30 years, temperatures have all collectively dropped.
Yeah.
Very few people can maintain healthy resting body temperature 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit anymore. And what the research implies on that is that, well, first and foremost, a person's body temperature is one of the most accurate gauges of immune function and basal metabolic rate. And basal metabolic rate really means your body's ability to turn calories from food you're eating into energy. So when we're seeing body temperatures around the world drop, right, it means we have a reduced inflammatory response and we're dealing with metabolic disease.
Hmm.
And there's no easier way to gauge your overall health than by taking your resting body temperature, right?
Yeah.
Very, yeah, very few people can have healthy resting body temperature anymore due to underlying
Wow.
chronic illness and metabolic disease.
Yeah, I think mine's lower. I think mine's like instead of 98.6, I think mine's like 97.8 is like my
Yeah,
resting body temperature.
yeah, that's pretty become, I think, the new average,
Hmm.
and we're being barraged with toxins, microplastic, heavy metals, vaccines, antibiotics, um, and really, I hate to sound like, you know, uh, try to sensationalize things, but the reality is we've all collectively as a species become chronically ill.
Yeah.
And
Wow. Which, I mean, we're living longer. It's kind of one of those things where when you look at like the Middle Ages, for example, and people, their life expectancy was like 40 years old, and that was it. If you lived to 50-year-old, and
yeah,
now we live longer. I mean, we are living longer than we've had. I think, though, the younger generations, they predict that they're not going to live as long as like the boomer generation right now or the greatest generation. They've been living quite longer lives, and they're saying now that younger generations are not going to live as long, but that's yet to be seen, I suppose. But overall, we are living longer, I think, because of modern medicine, but also mostly probably because of sanitation, would be my guess. Healthy clean water, sewage helps us live
um,
longer.
sure. I mean, I think that, statistically speaking, the majority of adults in the United States, at least over the age of 40, are medication dependent. Um, that's become commonplace. I forget the exact number. It's over 60% of adults over the age of 40 are taking prescription medication on a daily basis. As far as whether or not we're living longer, you know, um, I would say a more accurate way to describe it is that we're dying longer.
Mm.
Because we're becoming chronically ill, we're becoming medication dependent. Um, the process of dying has already started. If you were to
Mm.
remove these pharmaceutical drugs and kind of let nature take its course, people would pass.
Yeah.
And so we're not doing that. We're pumping people full of medication, and there's no quality of life like that. Mental illness has become commonplace and widespread. There was a study, a really alarming study that came out 3 years ago. It showed that 1/3 of the United States was taking psychiatric medication.
Yeah. Right.
So, you know,
Yeah.
um, you get into a discussion on quality of life, and it's, you know,
Sure. Okay. So going back to this research, what exactly? I mean, what are you telling people, Matthew? I mean, it's good. It's good that we hopefully open up this new avenue of research. We really look into this. But now, with this being said, I mean, if people thought avoiding Tylenol was scary, because that's what they did, they freaked out. Oh, you're telling us that we should suffer and not take Tylenol when we're feeling bad. And that's what we have to do now. Like we have to suffer. Oh, no. But what you're saying is even worse, right? You're saying, hey, you have this virus. You can't even do anything about the virus. I mean, no one can do anything about herpes simplex 1 or 2. There's no cure for it. It crops up like for me I get cold sores every once in a while. And it's when I'm typically more stressed or when my immune system is compromised, like I'm sick with something else. And then I can feel like a cold sore coming on. I mean, there's nothing I can really do to prevent that except maybe try to do more meditation, more yoga or something. I don't know. But it's like, what does a pregnant woman do? And she's sitting there like, well, yeah, I carry either herpes simplex 1 or herpes simplex 2. It's just so now what you're telling me, my kid's going to have autism and there's nothing I can do about it?
well, a modifiable risk factor would be if my hypothesis is correct. If viral infections like herpes simplex are directly involved in causing autism, and vaccines are suppressing the immune response, then you could lower your risk and lower your child's risk by not taking any vaccines. As you
Right.
mentioned,
Okay.
a lot of people carry viruses that, there's research suggesting they're involved in disease processes, but it's about maintaining overall health.
Mhm.
Um, if vaccines, as I mentioned, are suppressing the immune response and triggering these viruses to reactivate, um, that needs to be addressed. And we can establish an environmental risk factor and statistically speaking, whether or not this is happening. My hypothesis can be tested. My research is getting recognized internationally. Researchers as far as Iraq have cited my study already, and their findings support my hypothesis.
Mhm.
Um, I'm
Okay.
currently I'm currently in talks with members of the ACIP, and they're reviewing my research as well. So I'm hoping this is going to be followed up on, and I'm going to see this thing through.
Yeah. Excellent. Matthew, where can people follow you a bit more and read up about your research?
The best place to find me would be healthuncensored.com. I put a lot of different research presentations, video presentations on what's causing the chronic illness epidemic, as well as practical means of recovery and healing. And so that would be the best place, healthuncensored.com.
Okay. We do have that link below, healthuncensored.com. Matthew Cormier, thank you so much for being here and shedding light on this. I think that we do have to get to the bottom of what is causing all of this. And I think your research is quite compelling. I mean, it's interesting. It's also daunting, a little scary because it's like, oh, but I mean, obviously, I think the best method is, and the whole point of vaccines, those who are the people that want to take vaccines, those who want to develop vaccines, a lot of them are coming from a good place and a good, motivation, which is you just want to prevent disease, right? But pumping somebody full of medicine in order to prevent disease, maybe there is a better way to prevent disease rather than pumping them full of medicine, or understanding that maybe the certain medicine you're pumping them full, like if it's got these preservatives that are these heavy metals, that is the thing to avoid, and maybe there's a better way to make them, to manufacture them to avoid these types of triggers rather than, the problem with it right now is that they're all just plugging their ears with their fingers and closing their eyes and saying, no, 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 I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. It's not. You're a conspiracy theorist. You're a conspiracy theorist. And there's just more growing research to show that, no, this is not a conspiracy theory. There's something wrong. And we should actually pay attention to it and want to fix it rather than, just demonizing the people that are pointing out that there's a problem. But all of it, so it's great that you're doing this research. It's great that this is out there. It's still kind of scary. And it's like, oh, great. Now what? What do I do about this? But knowledge is the power. So we got to know. So we appreciate all the work that you've done. Again, that link, healthuncensored.com, is down below. Matthew Cormier, well, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Kim, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson Show, which you can watch Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific at KimIversonShow.com. See you there.